One of the toughest things about being a grappling athlete is balancing the training that you do in the gym with the training that you do on the mat. In this video, I sit down with Deandre Corbe. Deandre is quickly becoming one of the best grapplers in the entire world. He smoked his entire bracket at ADCC West Coast Trials, and he recently just won the Zapatero World Championships for the grand prize of $100,000. However, what I find most impressive about Deandre is that he's still a regular guy who works a full-time 9-to-5 job. In this interview, Deandre shares some of the best tips and practices that he uses to get the most out of his training both in the gym and on the mat, and some of the things that have helped him rise and elevate his performance as a grappler. I'm here with Deandre Corbe. Thank you so much for coming in, man.
Appreciate it, man.
ADCC West Coast Trials winner. You went on an absolute tear. It was an amazing thing to watch. You shared some of your experiences on Mark Bell's Power Project today. I had a couple questions for you just about your training. You, in some of the conversations we've been having in the gym and even some stuff you shared on the podcast, you talked about how you've been working with Rob Wilson.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And you guys have been working together for years, and you found a really great balance of strength and conditioning for being able to compete at a very, very high level. So my first question for you is, you mentioned a story where you and your brother were focused on getting crazy strong, doing 300-pound front squats and stuff, and Rob kind of helped bring a different approach to your training. What were some of the first changes that he made to your training that you saw significant improvements in your grappling athleticism?
So one of the things that he implemented was some basic aerobic conditioning. And like a bulk of our work was focused around that. You know, that was like our foundation, and we built higher end intensities off of that. And some of the other stuff was more power based stuff. Not so much your traditional barbell work, getting under the barbell, introduction with some med ball stuff. And really he introduced me to like training for different outcomes, hypertrophy, outcome for hypertrophy, outcome for general strength, outcome for power, outcome for conditioning. And he kind of split the week up, focusing on those different intentions, and it really kind of balanced out what I could do off the mat and allowed me to stay on the mat longer. Does that make sense? It didn't really get in the way of the skill work. That was like the biggest difference I saw from the traditional like lifting schemes.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Is it safe to say that you felt like doing a little bit less in the gym, but in a more specific and intentional way led to greater outcomes of what you were seeing on the mat?
Well, absolutely. One of the things was it just saved my body. A lot of the stuff we were following before I was talking to Rob was, based on like strength athletes, your traditional lifts. And, me and my brother, we just wanted to get strong as possible. So whatever is said on the program, we're going to do it. No matter, we didn't really have insight on how that was going to affect us long term, and in terms of how we're going to maintain like high volumes of skill work. And that was the biggest thing, really. It's just making sure that skill work stayed pretty high. Yeah.
For someone who does a ton of training, you're training at Standard Jiu Jitsu using the constraints-led approach, what would you say are 1 to 2 things that have really helped you have the energy to do your strength and conditioning work and your skills work in the same day?
So that's more of it's education on the athlete side. Being an athlete doesn't really stop in the training session. Like when we're in the gym, we're going to lift hard. We're going to do what prescribed, whatever protocol is there. When we're on the mat, we're going to do whatever practice the coach designs. But really, I think educating yourself on down regulation principles, understanding how to get into like shift into that parasympathetic state, finding different protocols for that really helps allow you to recover between like 2-a-day sessions. And that's where, and we talk about Rob helping me with the strength and conditioning, but a lot of it, most of it was him educating me on how do I go about after a session? How do you immediately downregulate and get into that state of relaxation so I'm able to go back the next day or later that day and continue to train at a high enough intensity where I'm still getting, creating some of those adaptations.
Were some of those things based around breath work? Was it things that you were doing with your nutrition to help you kind of quickly relax after the first session and then feel recovered for the second session? Was it breath work, nutrition? Was there specific supplementation that you were doing?
So mainly we reached for those easy to pull levers. One of the things you mentioned the breath work. That is something we did. You do right after a hard session. We immediately try to get like a period of just 5 minutes or more, just trying to down regulate. And sometimes it's hard to when we just came from a hard session, it's kind of hard to tell someone to calm down, and just tell them to do that. With the breath work and stuff, he gave, it's an objective measure. You're trying to follow a certain protocol, and that in turn helps you shift into that state. And then, in terms of the nutrition side of things, eating pretty much whole foods, and then eating heavy amounts of carbohydrates. And for me, that works, and I know that helps with energy output for later on. And some of those basic nutrition principles, he definitely helped me a lot with that. And I think those basic things are often neglected. People want to reach for those advanced nutrition, whatever protocols. Really, just make sure you're eating whole foods and make sure you're getting enough calories in.
That's amazing. So circling back to the breath work real quick, would it be something like you just finished a hard lift or a hard strength and conditioning session, you have your skills grappling training later in the day, so immediately following that gym session, is it like 4-second inhale, 4-second hold, box breathing kind of style? Is it a little bit, what does the breath work look like?
A lot of those things is it doesn't have to be a certain protocol, but one of the invariant things about breath work is prolonging exhales and generally put you in that parasympathetic state. And one of the, it doesn't really, it could be any protocol really, but just having a subjective measure on as you're doing this, are you feeling more relaxed? And if that subjective measure, if you're not really attuned with that, you're how that's making you feel, you can put a heart rate monitor and see that actually come down. So there's a bunch of different protocols, but I think one of the most invariant things that allow what I would do post hard session would be try to get my exhales nice and long, longer than my inhales, right? That's just a basic principle there. But then there's you said box breathing. It could be 4 seconds inhale, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds exhale, then 4 seconds hold, and you can mess around with the different cadences. But I think that's the easiest lever to pull right after a session. A lot of people want to go reach for the shake. A lot of people want to reach for the ice bath or whatever. The thing that we have the most easiest access to is the breath, and getting there first, that you could do immediately. The last bell rings, you start doing that, and then it just helps you transition if you want to add different nutrition principles, a shake or ice or a warm shower or whatever. It helps you bridge that gap from the state of being amping, redlining all the way to chill.
Is that something that you carried over in competition too? You competed at ADCC, you competed at West Coast Trials. Sometimes you have up to 4 or 5 matches in a day. Is that something you do between matches? As soon as you finish match number 1, you do your breath work and then try to relax until it's time to get ready for match number 2?
Right. In the beginning, you had to make that intentional effort to all right, when I first started working with Rob, he was all right, as soon as the match is done, we're gonna just down regulate whatever protocol. But as you get good at it and you practice that in your training, it almost happens organically. You kind of know where you need to be at intuitively after a match. Post match, and you're not going up until later in the afternoon. You don't need to be amped up for the rest of the day. You're probably wasting resources at that point. So you're just trying to down regulate, and after a little bit of practice, it kind of becomes organic. You know what to do. You know how to deal with the different states you're in. Sometimes I might need to use a breath pro that upregulates me. You coming off maybe the first match of the day, you're coming off of sleep, and you're not really warmed up. You find ways to kind of shift that state into the state where we want to be.
Gotcha. I wanted to ask you a little bit about recovery. On Mark Bell's Power Project, you laid out a typical training camp schedule, and you're doing a ton of training.
Yeah.
Something that Mark has talked about on the podcast, Andrew talks about a lot, I talk about a lot, is it's not necessarily about what you do, but what you can do and still recover from that leads to progress.
Right.
So what were some things, maybe one or two top things that you've found that when you're deep in training camp have helped you the most with your recovery?
So in training camp, so I don't want to say this out front, a lot of people probably hear this everywhere, is like sleep is king, right? But with that being said, is like sometimes we train late at night and then we have to immediately go to sleep. Getting to yourself to the state where you're in the parasympathetic state where you could sleep deeply it's not a switch. One of the things I try to implement is like a night routine, something consistent, where I'm like, I'm getting lights low. I'm like not doing anything stimulating, I'm maybe eating a good meal, but not too much. Like something that get me in that state. And for everybody, that's going to be a little different. But I think one of the things that helped me out is like just monitor that, through a heart rate monitor. You could see yourself kind of downregulate, get an objective measure on that. And then also, so that's one thing, getting a solid night routine. And then another one is probably just monitoring different metrics, having everybody's different. But if you could get a couple subjective metrics like, mood or soreness level on a 1 to 10 scale, and then a couple objective measures like HRV or something like that, and you can compound those over time, you kind of see where you're at in the week and you could auto-regulate your weekly training, The skill work's going to be the same usually, but if you send your data to your skills coach, like from Greg gets all my stuff and then he'll adjust the practice accordingly to make sure we're recovering and make sure we're still getting the skill development we need.
Well, one thing that you mentioned earlier in the gym was that having those metrics were really helpful, especially you're super competitive, you're incredibly disciplined and working super hard. And I think a lot of athletes that are either heavy competitors or just love living intensely and pushing really hard, having those metrics is a great way to indicate, like, I got to dial it back. What was your experience with first starting to look at some of those metrics and then starting to feel like, okay, I need to take things back? Was it difficult to dial things back when you needed to, or did you want to keep pushing through it?
Well, the metrics, just looking at the data itself allowed me, it justified any reason to kind of dial it back. Because if I didn't have any of those metrics, and I know a lot of athletes are like this, if they're not looking at objective measures, they're going to push hard because that's like the culture of any athletic background. People are we're going to go push hard because hard work is the answer, which it is, right? However, when we get those metrics and we're talking about performing on a certain day, all that work ethic and attention to like putting like intensity down, now that we have metrics to look at, we could put that same work ethic, not necessarily on the barbell or extra rounds on the mat. It's more like, all right, now I have data on this. How can I improve my sleep? How can I improve my recovery? It's that same, I think that's harder. That takes harder work to do than just going hard on the mat. Like telling yourself, all right, for sure, I need to make sure I'm doing X, Y, Z so I could get deep sleep, for example, or I need to be eating this amount of calories so I know I'm recovered. That's one of the things the metrics did for me, is like, now I have insight and now I can actually pull on some behaviors to kind of watch my recovery improve.
When you mentioned auto-regulating your training, I think a lot of people in the gym, because there's so much great information out there, are starting to better understand how to auto-regulate in the gym, either not loading up as much weight on the bar or staying a few more reps away from complete failure. Yet sometimes those same athletes that can do a really good job auto-regulating in the gym really struggle to auto-regulate on the mat. So what are some practices that you've used to help kind of auto-regulate some of your training when it comes to training on the mat?
So that's something, one, I would highly advise that the athlete really talk to their coach, because essentially the coach is the one that's going to design the on-the-mat practice. And it's also a responsibility for the coach to kind of read the room and see where everybody's at in terms of like how recovered they are. And there's different ways to look at it. You could kind of generally tell when everybody's pretty smoked. But one of the ways you could do that on the mat, it was like having a smaller focus. Let's say we're playing a certain game. It's like maybe the game is to pass the guard fully, right? That's the win condition. Maybe if I'm pretty smoked, I'll focus on just holding a line, holding the inside position as long as I could, because sometimes those tasks are daunting and it's hard to do a complete task like that, especially like you're, it's Wednesday or Thursday, it's been a long week of training and you're pretty smoked. But from the athlete's perspective, if the coach is not adjusting, that's what you could do. But I highly recommend like the coach and the athlete talk, and then the coach can pull the levers. Like, all right, we're going to change the constraints of this game where it's not as taxing. We could change the time of the game, or how long it's going to take. Or we can make the time longer because, when you increase time, intensity of exchanges tend to go down because there's a longer time. You could partner selection, like you could go with someone that's lighter. You could go with someone that's less skilled, and still get a good training session. So those are some of the things that you could do to kind of regulate your training, still get some mat time, but if you're feeling smoked, you could make sure you're recovering for the next training cycle.
So I think those are all amazing pieces of advice, and I think it's been awesome to see just over the last few years as you and your teammates at Standard Jiu Jitsu have been really just crushing it. It's been awesome to watch. It's been awesome to hear you guys and Greg talk about the constraints-led approach. Last question. This is just a fun one just for me.
Yeah.
What would you say are like your 3 favorite strength exercises, even if they don't have like the greatest carryover to your jiu-jitsu training? You mentioned you were gangstering out on front squats.
Yeah.
What would you say, like, are you just your 3 favorite gym exercises that go nuts on?
Like, let's see. I found this one. Zercher lunge is a good one because the split stance is pretty applicable, and then I just like zerchering because it feels good. And another exercise, weighted chins.
Okay.
And then weighted dips. Like if I had to choose 3, and then those are the only 3 I could do. Like if I'm living, I'm gonna do some zercher lower body variant, a weighted chin, and a weighted dip. Because I can never, like, if you're pressed for time, you're pressed for equipment, those hit all the things that you need, and then you get a good workout in, or get a good training session in.
That's perfect. Yep. Deandre, thank you so much.
Appreciate
it was a pleasure meeting you today. It was a pleasure learning from you. Make sure you guys check out the episode with Deandre and Greg Souders on Mark Bell's Power Project. Catch you guys later. Peace.